Now I'm going to create an orange to use for the wash in the foreground. I've selected warm yellow and warm red, and I'm going to take just a little tiny bit of that red and mix it into the yellow. Because remember, the dominant color is going to take over. So that's a pretty yellow orange right now. I can add a tiny bit more red to it to make it more of a medium orange. And I only need a little bit of this right now since I'm creating a wash that I'll use. That's perfect. Get a few drops of water in here. And I'm gonna hold the palette in my hand. That's really the best way to paint, is to have the palette in your hand. That way you can move your paints right next to the surface. You don't have to like drag it from someplace else. So I'm gonna charge up the brush with some paint. Mix that in. And if I look at, this would be like a medium orange. That's really way over here on this end of the value scale. So I want to create a wash that's going to be really light like that one. I just tripped onto my painting. Doesn't matter. Just going to pick it up. No big deal. And so when you first start painting with this, it's going to look very yellow because it's just a wash. Also, again, if you overlap, if you go by mistake into the background a little bit, that's okay. This is just giving you like a little bit of a base to paint on top of, so it's not so white. Painting on white is kind of annoying. So sometimes artists will mix a light color and paint their whole canvas a light color before they paint on top of it. And it just makes it a little bit easier to paint on. So here I've just already created that sense of the foreground popping out towards us and the background falling back. And if I want to add any of these more darker values in here, I'm just going to pick up right from the orange area and try to make this side of the pear a little bit darker orange, and then maybe this part of the cylinder and maybe the jar a little bit too. My canvas paper right now is pretty wet, so I don't want to do too much. When I get that paint on, I'll kind of like shape my brush with it. If you like paint along the palette, you can bring it to a point. And that'll be good for this whole side of this cylinder. And maybe the paper surface underneath. So everything we're doing right now is kind of just to sort of get a sense of how light or dark the surface is. And it's almost like a little bit of a practice painting before we start doing the thick painting on top of it. Any cast shadows, like there's this whole cast shadow that is falling here and on the tabletop surface, I'm going to kind of just leave it and use a wash of blue later on, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. So here we go. I've created a wash in the foreground and the background using acrylic paint, but watering it down. Now for cleaning up, I'm going to want to get these washes probably out of here so they don't drip all over the place. But I want to save that orange because I've used it here, and tomorrow when I paint again, I might want to paint on top of that and have that same sort of orange. So remember that when you put your palette away and you want to save these colors, get some paper towel or a little bit of sponge. You can cut off a little bit of sponge somewhere. Soak the paper towel, wring it out, drop it inside, and then wrap this thing up with plastic so your paint stays wet until tomorrow.